Alright, so can I start this video by just saying that late August, early September has been absolutely nuts for game releases? Like, the production of this video during my free time has pretty much been competing with multiple other games. In this case, I would explicitly state Void Stranger, which I cannot show footage of because there's just so much in that game that's a spoiler just by showing it. As well as stuff like Sea of Stars, which I haven't even gotten to. And of course, there's the obvious options of Armored Core 6 and freaking Starfield. Regardless, this is going to be the video I've been working on that makes it out first, so let's just begin. It's time to go back to Sonic. No gag intro this time, cause there are games I actually like this time. Granted, first, let's recycle some old Sonic footage in order to establish some ground rules. 1. No edutainment. I'm not touching edutainment with a 10-mile pull. Like, yeah, Sonic Schoolhouse is an easy meme, but also, the Sega Pico is a thing that exists, and I don't want to talk about it, so no edutainment. The next rule is, I'm going to be omitting some arcade games that are more attractions than games. Stuff like the Segasonic Popcorn Shop, that's not going to be done. The last rule is no unlicensed games. I already tortured myself with that in the Mikusa video, so just let me have this one for what semblance of sanity I have left. So it at least needs to have some form of legitimacy around its release. Which is why I'm going to loophole our first game, because when the fuck else am I going to talk about this title? Okay, so I know I'm starting with a technicality, but it's so weird that I just want to give this one a brief little mention. Because, to be blunt, the only other way I would be talking about this is if I talked about the developer themselves, Factor 5, who are working under a pseudonym. See, The Adventures of Quick and Silva is an Amiga platformer that was made quite rapidly by Factor 5 under the pseudonym of New Bits on the RAM. Effectively, this is them basically needing money and pitching a game to a fucking cover magazine, which, that's more European stuff. Games got released in magazines over there as well as demo discs. But considering that Quick and Silva is even an expression for needing money on the cheap, just the entire thing is so weird, and the cherry on top of this otherwise mediocre game with a weird story is that it's probably one of the most copyright infringement heavy games in existence. Considering that if the footage is played, you'll have seen it by now, but Sonic the Hedgehog is an enemy, but this game released quite a bit before Sonic the Hedgehog, because this version of Sonic the Hedgehog was taken only from pre-release teaser footage, anything that was available in the magazines at the time. And that's just wild. So while it's not a spin-off explicitly, it did get released in, I'd say, something somewhat reputable, but it's just such a weird case that I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about it before we get to the actual meat. So the first proper game is Sonic 1 for the Game Gear and Master System. For those of you that don't know what a Master System was, well, basically Sega's answer to the NES at the time, which was more popular in Europe and Brazil than anywhere else. Regardless, it should be stated that the SMS and the Game Gear have the same sort of processing power behind them, so no, I'm not going to look at both versions. I'm just counting them all as one thing, and I'm using the Master System version. With that out of the way, the 8-bit version of Sonic 1 is pretty much the definition of, yeah, it's okay. There's some bad stuff such as forced scrollers, but I also kind of like the idea of making the Emerald Hunt into a literal scavenger hunt instead of, bonus stages, special stages, and the usual sorts of things. But yeah, with it being just a pretty solid game, it's kind of a surprise that it's actually the developer's first game. You see, the 8-bit Sonic 1 was made by a company called Ancient. Ancient Corporation, or Ancient Corp, was basically founded by the Kojiro family. If you're familiar with video game music at all, you might be asking, wait, not that Kojiro, right? Yeah, it's that Kojiro. Yuzo Koshiro is the current head of it. And you know what? making a Sonic game that's pretty decent is pretty good for your first game. As a little bit of a side note, it does seem that they are going into modern Mega Drive devs, so I guess keep an eye out for that. Okay, so have you ever played something that looks and feels like a bootleg, but it's actually an official product? That's Sonic Eraser. Sonic Eraser was a game release for the Sega Game Toshokan, or Sega Game Library. Effectively, it's a pre-Sega Channel service to which you could use the Japanese-only Mega Modem in order to download games. It should be noted that some of these actually did get physical releases, like Flicky or Fatal Labyrinth, or Columns even. But Sonic Eraser didn't, and it's kind of a miracle that it's even been dumped. In fact, this game is something I'm more including here just to be comprehensive, because it's kind of mid, and everything surrounding it is far more interesting than the game. So we'll just go into the next one with an animation of Sonic punching another Sonic. So in many respects, the 8-bit version of Sonic 2 is kind of the epitome of the adage of second verse, same as the first. On paper, the new developer aspect has kind of just been able to build upon what Ancient did for Sonic 1 8-bit. However, let's get into a little bit of a childhood story to explain why this one doesn't work quite as well. See, most of the footage that you are seeing comes from the Master System version of Sonic 2, which only released in Europe. A lot of us, shall we use the slang term Yanks, kinda experienced it through either an actual Game Gear, which, like, as someone who had a lot of hand-me-downs, it's kind of hilarious in hindsight how valuable all this old hardware has become, or through an emulation collection like the one in Sonic Adventure DX or Sonic Gems collection. To give you an idea of what that looks like, here you go. Here's the footage. Yeah, this sort of level design absolutely does not fit the sheer awful resolution the Game Gear has, and the sheer screen crunch is abysmal. And I played through this all as a squeaker, like this. The littlest jumps outright become leaps of faith, to the point where Green Hills Act 3 has just become infamous for being the one level that everyone burns their lives on. Imagine a squeaker professor who braved through the entire game at that resolution, eventually figuring out the infamous Green Hills 3 jump. And then, come Scrambled Egg, whoops, you forgot an emerald, it was in Sky High, and it's at the very top of the screen where screen crunch is really not friendly to. I mean, I replayed it again with my Game Gear on the charger because that thing ate through batteries like crazy. But actually getting to Crystal Egg made me quite miserable and not as proud as I should have been at beating something quite hard. Because the screen resolution being reduced makes challenges that are pretty fun, pretty fair, into absolute nightmares, and it brings the entire game down. So yeah, the best way to play this specific game is to find the Master System version of it. It's an alright game when you do that, but if you play the Game Gear version, it's just insufferably annoying. Alright, we're not gonna spend much time on this one, but it's another one that I'm including for completion's sake. Segasonic Brothers is a complete but unreleased arcade game. It was supposed to be official, and it was designed by the designer of Bubble Bobble. However, bluntly put, yeah, I can kinda see why it was abandoned. Basically, the gameplay centers around forming circles. Think of it like Tetris, except instead of line, you've gotta form circles. Simple when you put it on paper, but thanks to the fact that you're always going to get 4x4 blocks and you need to do it of one color, yeah, it's just unwieldy as hell. And again, it's a pretty simple arcade game, so there's not much else to say, except for the fact that one little bit of unused content, which is Vector the Crocodile sprite, would get reused later. Oh, also, when you form circles, you could do this to Eggman.
No way! I can't believe this!
Alright, enough of me joking around. It's more arcade time, since the next game is Segasonic the Hedgehog. the game that was the debut of the best lad, Mighty the Armadillo. And, yeah, I tried. See, I love this game's aesthetics and its music, but it's got one fatal flaw that kept me and Drill, the goose man from last time, from, well, finishing this. The only conceivable way to play this right now is through emulation. This has never gotten a re-release, and you're playing with trackball controls mapped to a joystick. It became miserable enough that poor Drill just walked off, and I really can't blame him. I do want the fact that I have attempted to play this to kind of be a footnote as to why making preservation accessible is important. Ease of access is absolutely a part of preservation, and yeah, there's no way in hell the average person is going to suffer through this with joysticks. Okay, so this is Editing Professor here. It appears that during my coverage of Segasonic the Hedgehog, I forgot one important thing. See, the reason why the control stick controls are so offensive is that the game controls perfectly fine if you use keyboard. Which, to me at least, is the most baffling thing in existence, because who the hell uses a keyboard to play games that aren't like a first-person shooter anymore? It's weird and perplexing, but let's not stall off the video with this addendum any further. If I can summarize Sonic Chaos in a single word, it's fine. Sonic Chaos is absolutely adequate, perfectly fine, and you know what? That's fine. But, so that I'm not repeating the same word multiple times, it's more of the same from aspect, but they learned a lot of lessons and added a bunch of stuff like the spin dash to bring it in line with the other Sonic games at the time. In fact, this one even has special stages, even if they're weirdly reached by collecting 100 rings. Also, for whatever reason, only Sonic can access them, which is just mind-boggling. In fact, while Tails is here and he can fly like his 16-bit counterpart, it's a lot more stiff and jank. Like, this is before Sonic 3 was out. It's a lot more forgivable, but it still has some signs of being, shall we just say, stiff and unwieldy. Otherwise, graphical presentation is good, music is pretty good, and it has some solid bops like Mecha Green Hill Zone. You could do infinitely worse with the Sonic series. Speaking of which, that brings us to... it's time for one that was painful to record. Sonic Spinball. There's two versions of these, and I have nothing positive to say about either of them. So these games are developed by the Western arm of Sega Technical Institute, a thing I am 90% sure I explained in my bigger Sonic video. And most of the games that they produced are not good. Out of all of them, I think I only ever liked Comix Zone, and even then, that one's way too brutal. Both versions of Sonic Spinball, on the other hand, are nigh uncontrollable. 90% of my time recording the 8-bit version, I couldn't even get past the first screen. I have zero idea how I managed to do it so easily as a squeaker. But it runs so poorly, and you constantly have to fight the controls and the frame rate coming together to just make this slop. So then what about the 16-bit version? That's gotta be better, right? Sorta. You're still fighting against the controls constantly, the opposite of what you want in a pinball game. The music's pretty bad, it's gems, it's that thing that no one could use correctly. And like, I love pinball, I'm a pinball diehard, stumbling across a Black Knight 2000 pinball machine in the wild, happiest fucking day of my life. Hit me up with a video game like Devil's Crush any day of the week. But this is just bad. But if either of these are worth playing, well, if you can put up with the jank feeling of the 16-bit version and you're not a pinball aficionado, maybe. But the 8-bit version of Sonic Spinball is just a travesty. Stay away from that one. Triple Trouble's actually one that I've had zero nostalgia for. Whoever had my childhood Game Gear the last didn't have Triple Trouble. But it's the first one of these specifically designed with the Game Gear in mind. and as a result, it's aesthetically gorgeous. But it's a little bit worse than Chaos. It's still pretty good considering the fact that it's a Sonic game running on a weak little Z80 as compared to its bigger brother's big beefy Motorola. God damn, fucking shoot me for writing that. But despite the fact that Aspect have clearly learned a lot from making 8-bit Sonic games, this one has some serious problems. Despite not owning it in my childhood, I did get a cartridge later down the line, and I can tell you on hardware, this game chugs. Plus, for everything that's neat and interesting, like the Sunset Park train boss, there's a special stage or few to bring it down. It still deserves its status as a cult classic amongst Sonic games, though. In fact, it's such a cult classic that it got a fan remake. Yeah, it's not the focus of this video, but I probably would somewhere down the line get an angry comment if I didn't mention the fantastic fan remake of Triple Trouble. And again, it is fantastic. It's pretty much what could have been, since it doubles as not just a love letter to Triple Trouble, but the Sega Genesis as a console. The soundtrack's using an emulated Genesis, as well as the fact that it pulls off a lot of effects that came in pretty hardware-pushing Genesis games. Again, it's not the focus of the video, but it does get my seal of approval, as well as it's just the best way to experience Triple Trouble, not the original. So Chaotix is a weird one. It initially started life on the Genesis under the codename of Sonic Crackers, which an extremely janky prototype was dumped, and in fact, you've been watching the footage of that. Eventually, though, it was decided to move it to this, the 32X. This wretched mistake of an abomination born of a pissing contest between Sega of America and Sega of Japan. I hate it so much! Despite the fact that I loathe the 32X, it is what Chaotix was released for, so best to bite the bullet. It's also one of the games that I could play in 2-player for this, so yeah. For a lot of these games that do have 2-player functionality, you've been seeing Drill, you know, the Goose Man from one of the other videos. And you know what? I got to use my boy Mighty. It's just too bad that Chaotix kind of barely fucking works. However, with 2 players, it becomes that barely works that is kind of fun to laugh at. Especially if one of you two chooses the most broken character in the game, Charmy the Bee. Despite the fact that Chaotix lives or dies by its bungee mechanic in which the 2 players are kind of just, you know, bound together, Charmy adds a little bit of a wrench into it by just allowing for short bursts of flight anywhere that can be spammed. The sheer resulting chaos from this was just enough for us to do the equivalent of pointing and laughing. And while it's for all the wrong reasons, we had quite a good time playing it. Would I revisit it? Fuck no! But at the least, despite how bad some of these games are, it was a dumb couple of laughs. The Sonic Drift games, aka We Have Mario Kart at Home. The second one released the same year as Chaotix, so it's being talked about now. Usually, I take the less is more kind of approach, but this is more the less is less kind of approach. There is really not much to talk about other than there's good reason why most people don't make traditional racers where you race into the screen. Every character has a fixed power-up, you can gain others on the course, and again, 2 is the better of the 2 Sonic Drift games. Like, yeah, you could get some fun out of it, but don't go in there expecting a lot of depth. You're not gonna get it. Tails Sky Patrol is an interesting idea done poorly. In fact, I completely get why this game stayed in Japan until the emulation collections hit. I can also keep this one short because the flaws with this game are kind of blatant. You are Tails with a flight gauge, and the flight gauge represents basically your time limit. You can increase it with candies, and getting hit sends you plummeting towards the ground. You can recover from this, but if you hit the wall or you hit the ground, that's a life lost right there. The thing that brings this down is that a lot of the obstacles count as wall or ground. Tails Sky Patrol is cheap, really cheap, which is a shame because aesthetically, it puts the fact that the Game Gear has more colors than the Genesis to good use. I mean, for the training course, you have a weaker console just making a beautiful Emerald Hill. The other fatal flaw is that, with hypothetical one-hit deaths, the stages are way too long. The thing that got me to stop recording Tails Sky Patrol is just length. It gets so boring as the stages stretch on and on and on. It's terrible. Luckily, though, this isn't the only Tails-centric game here. Tails Adventure, in my humble opinion, is the best game in the Sonic franchise, hands down. It's also the only one that I'm running modded. The SMS Deluxe patch allows you to A, see more of the screen due to the Master System's higher resolution, as well as have a little thing that we in the modern era take kinda for granted, the ability to save your game. In a baffling choice for this type of game, the Game Gear version had password saves instead of proper SRAM. But one may ask, why is this your favorite? Why not something like Sonic 3, Sonic CD, any of the adventure games? The thing is, Tails Adventure isn't concerned about being a good traditional Sonic game on the hardware. Instead, it just focuses on being a good game. If I wanted to use an overused term, a good Metroidvania. It's a stage-to-stage variant where your goal is to take out the boss at the end of each area. But you're also going to want to comb around the area a lot too, since you can find a lot of new items, some of which are absolutely necessary to completing the game. Chaos Emeralds also work completely differently here. Instead of being haha yellow guy go brr, they extend your health and your flight gauge. It makes exploring these little areas as well as revisiting them even more important since the emeralds now make your entire trek easier. It's truly a great, underrated game, and I'm so happy I have a cartridge of it to this day. Even though I use the SMS Deluxe patch, this game is fantastic no matter how you play it. Sonic Labyrinth, which, in my scripts, you have no idea how many times the Yu-Gi-Oh! Archetype I've run has given me such brain rot that I misspelled this, so... Anyways, it's probably one of the most maligned Sonic games by diehards of the series. And it's just like, you could do so much worse for an isometric Sonic game.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
But it's an okay game. It's a bit more comparable to a pinball game where instead of flippers, you have a spin dash, and you can activate that spin dash as you need. Since the entire plot has Sonic trying to get off slowdown shoes that make him unable to run, but still allow him to roll. You're not going to get anything in-depth or amazing here, but it's a fun distraction for what it is. It's just that you need to get used to actually reorienting yourself, and that takes like a second or so. And I guess the hardcore Sonic fans just don't have that patience. And following that, we have Sonic the Fighters. My first of the two uses of the Gems collection for this video. While Sonic Gems collection was mostly an emulation collection, a few of the games on there were ports from either PC releases or from the arcade cabinet. And this is the arcade cabinet. While this did later on get a release on the 360, I don't have one, and the store will probably be gone by the time I would be able to even remotely record that. And it's developed by Sega AM2, which has a hell of an arcade pedigree behind it. Outrun, Space Harrier, Afterburner, Virtua Fighter, as well as Fighters Megamix and USA. So with a studio with that many heavy hitters, this game has to be good, right? Yeah, it's not deep or complex, but it absolutely is. No beating around the bush there. Yeah, see, Drill and I completely forgot how to play this game, so we were just flailing around at each other and having the time of our lives. And to me, that's the hallmark of a fun fighter. Not a good fighter. There's a league of difference. But one that you could just turn your brain off and have a blast playing with. With how fast, vibrant, and despite the fact that there are some complex inputs for some attacks, simple otherwise it is, Sonic the Fighters genuinely hit the spot for both of us. However, this kind of comes with the caveat of, once the 360 and PS3 stores go down, well, either hunting down a copy of Sonic Gems Collection, which admittedly isn't the most expensive option, or sailing the high seas will be the only way to play this game. So I can at least say, go get this and enjoy this while you can. If you have some friends you want to entertain, this is absolutely a good way to do it. Alright, let's keep this rolling. Next we have... It's Sonic 3D Blast. Ugh. See, Sonic 3D Blast is developed by Traveler's Tales, now known as that people who make the LEGO games. Back in the 16 and 32-bit era, Traveler's Tales were a bit more well known for making some pretty technically impressive games that, as games, were either unremarkable or terrible. Sonic 3D Blast is outright atrocious gameplay-wise. It's a faster-than-average isometric platformer, which are words you never want to hear together in a sentence. You see, for whatever reason, Sonic 3D Blast adds collectathon elements, and they're kind of infuriatingly implemented. You see, your goal in each stage is to get to the end, simple enough. But to do that, you need to collect 5
Burn!
per area, which usually each act, not zone, but act has 2 areas. So per zone, that's 20
Bird!
that you have to collect, with really slippery controls, and if you so much as get sneezed on, all of those birds are going to scatter. Did I mention the control is really, really bad? But if you remove them, then this game loses what identity it has. It just becomes a shallow isometric jogging simulator that, well, kind of just has tacky pre-rendered sprites. And look, I know about the various improvement patches, but no, this game is just bad. And while I don't want to boot it up because I don't think it's worth booting up my Saturn for, I do have to, for completion's sake, mention that this did get a Saturn port. One that seems a bit, Sonic Extreme cancellation apology shape. Regardless, I would consider this the second worst game we're looking at tonight, with Sonic Spinball 8-bit being the third. If I have just dragged this game through the mud, why would I only say second? Well... And that's because the next game is Sonic Blast, the worst game on this list tonight, and your options are pretty much either screen crunch galore on the Game Gear, or an extremely janky Brazilian Master System port. And you know what? I like weird stuff. Let's go with the janky Brazilian Master System port. Gaze upon how crusty this looks in every single imaginable way. How the controls feel stiff and unresponsive. The fact that the entire game looks like refried Donkey Kong Country. Which, I already don't like those games, so oh lordy. And the special stages. And it's tragic because this is another Aspect game. So in today's video, Aspect have made both the best game with Tails Adventure and the worst game with this one. It feels like they took everything they learned from making Sonic 2 8-bit, Chaos, Triple Trouble, and so forth, and just yeeted it out the window. If you want bottom of the barrel, yet barely functional, this is the Sonic game for you. It's also got one of the worst water levels in anything ever, so have fun. I'm not going to. And since I do like trying to keep these videos positive, what I could say about Sonic Blast that is positive is the last couple of tracks are pretty acceptable. Unfortunately, I'm not quite done with bad games yet, because the next game is... It's Sonic R. Like, okay, I know. Sonic R is a giant meme, and deservedly so let's get it out of our systems. Sonic R comes to us from Traveler's Tales again, so you know what that means. It's a technically impressive game with janky design, and I'm opting for the Gems Collection version again because, look, while Sonic R is pretty dang impressive on the Saturn, it's also got probably one of the worst draw distances I've ever seen, or haven't seen, because that's the joke, the draw distance is terrible. And the PC version is for like Windows 98, and I don't know how hard that is to get running on a modern computer. And lucky enough, the Gems Collection version is a port of that PC version, so that's what I'm going with. And yeah, it controls weird. It's a button to accelerate in an on-foot platformer, and if it was just that, it'd be forgivable, but there's collectibles. And since the emeralds require you to get an obscene amount of rings and finish first, it's just a game with counterintuitive design. It's like, okay, this comparison is going to be weird, but please, bear with me. Have you all ever seen the movie Vampire's Kiss? The one with Nicolas Cage that, for the reasons of I'm still trying to figure out what sets off copyright, I will not show. It's a pretty bad movie that is extremely entertaining to watch. It's less a movie and more just a giant meme. Sonic R is the equivalent to that. Sonic R is not a game you play when you want to have a good time. Sonic R is more of the good time you have by inviting all of your friends over, just getting some pot or booze or something, and just singing along with the music like a bunch of fucking idiots. And to be absolutely fair, there is some value in that. Hence why I'm not going as hard on the game itself as I probably should. Luckily, we don't have to end on a bad note, because see, the final game tonight, the one that bridges what's called the classic era and the modern era, is Sonic Pocket Adventure. Sonic Pocket Adventure was made by a division of SNK that would disband but then reform as Dimps, who get kind of reviled by the fanbase for their Sonic games, but I think their Sonic games are on the better end of what they've made. And for what it is, this game is genuinely a pretty cool remix of the 16-bit Sonic 2, just on a very powerful 8-bit handheld. There's some cool touches in this game, like Eggman starting out in his classic outfit, but when you fight him at the end, he has his modern outfit. There's also some confusing music choices from Sonic 3, I will admit. Like, genuinely, what the actual fuck at Sky Sanctuary being used for the Supersonic boss? Regardless though, I'm just happy that with a game like this, I get to end the video on a high note. Well, reasonably high. I do hope that this suffices an in-between video of the stuff that I've been really itching to do. It's just that at times it becomes easier to say, just record a bunch of Sonic games in some of my downtime than to meticulously edit and take notes on a very intricate game. I thank you all for bearing with me, and I do hope you enjoyed this video on, well, more Sonic, and I hope you'll all enjoy the next video as well.